At my grandson Leo's 8th birthday, my daughter-in-law Vanessa leaned in and whispered, "She's not even your real grandmother." Then Leo, my sweet boy, pushed away my gift, calling me fake grandma. My own son Michael just told me to leave. I left that day, but I never truly left. I built something incredible instead. Like and share this story and tell me where you're listening from. Let's see how far my story reaches. The words, even now, 7 years later, echo in my mind with the clarity of a church bell tolling. She's not even your real grandmother. Vanessa's voice, sharp and laced with a malice I'd only ever glimpsed before, sliced through the cheerful cacophony of Leo's 8th birthday party. The pain was immediate, a cold, searing sensation that spread through my chest, constricting my breath. It wasn't just a casual remark, it was a carefully aimed dagger. Then came the second blow, far worse than the first. My sweet Leo, my vibrant, loving grandson, pushed away the carefully chosen model airplane I'd wrapped for him. His eyes, usually so full of warmth for me, now clouded with confusion, then hardening into a chilling accusation. "I don't want you here, fake grandma," he declared, his small voice brimming with an unfamiliar disdain. I was 65 years old that day, but in that moment, I felt like a child again. Stripped bare and vulnerable. All the years, all the sacrifices flashed before my eyes. My life hadn't been easy. I raised Michael, my only son, alone after my beloved husband David passed away when Michael was just 5. The world suddenly became a colder, harder place, but I swore I wouldn't let it break me or him. I worked 3 jobs, an early morning shift at the bakery, a part-time position as a librarian, and evenings spent cleaning offices. My hands were often raw, my back ached perpetually, and sleep was a luxury I rarely afforded myself. But every penny, every ounce of my energy went into creating a stable, loving home for Michael. I wanted him to have everything David and I had dreamed for him: a good education, opportunities we never had, a life free from the constant worry that plagued my own. I scrimped and saved, making sure he had new books, proper clothes, and never felt deprived, even as I wore shoes with worn-out soles. His tuition fees for college were paid through my sheer willpower and relentless effort. Seeing him graduate, a proud young man ready to take on the world, felt like my greatest triumph. It was a testament to our bond, a monument to a mother's unconditional love and sacrifice. My heart swelled with pride and the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived, despite its hardships. Then came Vanessa. She was bright, ambitious, and from a family with means, everything I was not. Michael fell deeply in love, and I too welcomed her, hoping for nothing more than my son's happiness. When they announced they were expecting, my world was utterly complete. The prospect of becoming a grandmother, a doting, involved grandmother, filled the void I hadn't realized still existed. I envisioned a future of baking cookies, reading stories, and experiencing the pure, unadulterated joy of a child all over again, but this time without the crushing weight of sole responsibility. And for a few glorious years, that dream was my reality. Leo was born, a tiny bundle of perfection who instantly stole my heart. I was there for his first breath, his first coo, his first tentative steps across the living room carpet. I sang him lullabies until my voice grew hoarse, changed countless diapers, and rocked him to sleep more times than I could count. I was Grandma, a title I cherished more than any other. His first words, a mumbled "Grandma," were a symphony to my ears. I spent every Tuesday and Thursday babysitting, giving Vanessa time to pursue her career, never asking for a dime. I wanted to be needed, to be loved, to pour all the deferred affection I had into this precious boy. But subtly, almost imperceptibly at first, things began to shift. Vanessa's comments started as fleeting observations, then grew into pointed remarks. "Oh, Eleanor, you spoil him too much," she'd say, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Or, "Leo's getting used to your way of doing things. It's different from how Michael and I parent." Her eyes, I noticed, would narrow just a fraction, a silent judgment hanging in the air. Invitations to family dinners became less frequent. My input on Leo's schooling or activities was increasingly dismissed. I felt myself being pushed to the periphery, a silent observer in a life I once played a central role in. The birthday party was a whirlwind of colorful balloons, boisterous children, and a cake shaped like a rocket ship. I had arrived early, eager to help, only to find most things already handled. As I helped myself to a glass of punch, I overheard Vanessa's voice from the kitchen, low and conspiratorial, clearly on the phone. "Honestly, she's too much," she muttered, not realizing I was within earshot. Always hovering, always trying to be the main grandma. It's like she forgets. She's not even really his grandmother. Not like Martha is. It's just different. My blood ran cold. Martha was Vanessa's mother, a lovely woman, but she lived out of state and saw Leo only a few times a year. Before I could process the sting of her words, Vanessa emerged from the kitchen, phone still in hand. Her eyes met mine, a flicker of surprise, then something else, something hard and determined. She walked directly to Leo, who was excitedly unwrapping a toy, and knelt beside him. She put an arm around him, pulling him close, and spoke in a voice deliberately loud enough for me to hear. "Sweetheart," she began, her tone falsely sweet, "there's something important Mommy needs to tell you." Leo looked up at her, curiosity sparkling in his eyes. "Grandma Martha is your real grandma, the one from my side. Eleanor," she paused, glancing at me with a chilling smirk. "Eleanor is just Daddy's mom. That's different. She's not really your grandmother in the same way." I watched, frozen as the pure, unburdened love in Leo's eyes shifted. First, confusion knitted his brow, then a slow dawning of understanding, followed by an undeniable coldness. The innocent adoration he'd always shown me was replaced by suspicion, then a dismissive blankness. It was like watching a light switch off. Moments later, when I offered him his gift, his rejection cut me deeper than any wound. "I don't want you here, fake grandma." His words were like a physical blow, echoing Vanessa's cruel narrative. My knees almost buckled. Just then, Michael, my son, walked into the living room, drawn by the sudden silence. He saw Leo's tear-streaked face, Vanessa standing stiffly beside him, and me, paralyzed with pain, clutching a rejected gift. His gaze lingered on me, then on Vanessa, then back to me. A sigh escaped his lips. "Mom," he said, his voice flat, devoid of the warmth I remembered. "Maybe you should go. Give us some space to handle this." Space. He wanted space from his heartbroken mother, his mother who had dedicated her entire life to him. The betrayal was complete. I nodded, unable to speak, and walked out of the party, out of Leo's life, and out of my son's home. That was the beginning of 7 years of silence. My carefully chosen birthday cards for Leo came back unopened. My calls to Michael and Vanessa went straight to voicemail, then became blocked entirely. My attempts to reach out on social media were met with silence. Then I discovered I'd been blocked there too. It was as if I had ceased to exist, erased from their lives without a trace, a consequence of Vanessa's calculated cruelty and Michael's shocking acquiescence. But as the initial shock and despair began to subside, a quiet resolve settled within me. My heart ached, yes, but it refused to break entirely. I would not let their contempt define my existence. I decided then and there that I would channel this profound pain, this gaping wound, into a new purpose, something significant. I didn't know what it would be or how it would manifest, but I knew I wouldn't waste another moment wallowing in what was lost. I would build something instead, something that would stand as a testament to my enduring spirit, something they could never take away. The first year without Leo was a prolonged agony, a stark, painful emptiness that settled deep in my bones. Every morning, I would wake up for a fleeting second with a sense of peace, a fragile illusion that life was normal. Then the memories would crash over me. Leo's bewildered eyes, his childish rejection, Michael's cold dismissal. The silence in my small house, once filled with the imagined echoes of his laughter, became a suffocating blanket. Holidays were the worst. Thanksgiving, Christmas, his birthday, all passed in a blur of forced cheerfulness with distant relatives, punctuated by the sharp pang of absence. I cried more in that first year than I had since David died, maybe even more than I thought possible. The grief was different this time, a raw wound of betrayal rather than the gentle sorrow of loss. It was a weeping that came from a place of profound emotional violence. But somewhere around the 13th month, the well of tears finally ran dry. One morning I woke up and there was no surge of despair, just a hollow ache. I looked in the mirror at the weary lines etched around my eyes, the slight tremble in my hands, and a cold determination solidified within me. I was not broken. I was bent, but not broken. The pain hadn't disappeared, but it had transmuted into a steely resolve, a quiet fire that burned with purpose. I would not wither away. I was still working, cleaning houses and offices, just as I had for decades. One of my regular clients was Mrs. Albright, who owned a small, local cleaning service. I had been working for her for nearly 5 years by then, often picking up extra shifts. As I moved through the properties, scrubbing floors and polishing surfaces, I couldn't help but notice the subtle inefficiencies in her operation. The routes weren't always optimized, the supplies weren't always bought in bulk for the best prices, and her scheduling system was a chaotic mess of handwritten notes. I saw the potential, the untapped growth that lay dormant within the business, simply waiting for someone to streamline and modernize it. It was a familiar pattern to me. I had always found ways to make things work better, faster, with less. It was how I had survived. One Tuesday morning, as I was finishing up the Albright family home, Mrs. Albright herself sat down at her kitchen table, a sigh escaping her lips. "Eleanor," she began, her voice tinged with weariness, "I think it's time. My knees aren't what they used to be, and managing this business, well, it's a lot. I'm thinking of selling." My heart gave a little jolt. It was a small business, maybe 4 or 5 full-time employees besides myself, but it was established with a loyal client base. The words opportunity practically screamed in my mind. I had a meager $3,000 in my savings account, tucked away for a rainy day that had clearly arrived. It was barely enough to cover a down payment on a used car, let alone a business. Yet a spark ignited within me. This could be it. This could be the purpose I was looking for. For the next 6 months, every spare moment was dedicated to intense self-study. My evenings, once spent in quiet contemplation of my loneliness, were now consumed by textbooks from the library, online courses, and countless articles about business management. I devoured information on small business loans, understanding the intricacies of franchising, the daunting world of accounting, and the art of marketing. I learned about balance sheets, profit and loss statements, customer acquisition, and even how to use spreadsheet software on a computer, a challenge in itself for someone who had mostly used a pen and paper her entire life. My kitchen table became a makeshift war room, littered with highlighted pages, hastily scribbled notes, and complex equations I barely understood at first, but slowly, painstakingly came to grasp. The day I finally approached the loan officer at the bank, I felt a mix of nerves and defiant resolve. Mr. Henderson, a man barely half my age, looked at me with an air of polite skepticism. A 60-year-old cleaning lady, with minimal savings, wanting to buy a business? I could see the unspoken question in his eyes. "What makes you think you can do this?" His questions were perfunctory at first, a routine dismissal wrapped in corporate courtesy. "Mrs. Vance, with all due respect, your financial history doesn't exactly scream entrepreneur." I nodded calmly. "I understand, Mr. Henderson, but my history also screams survivor. I've worked hard my entire life, and I know the value of a dollar and the value of hard work." Then I laid out my meticulously researched business plan. It wasn't just a vision, it was a blueprint. I had analyzed Mrs. Albright's current operations, identified areas for cost-cutting, from renegotiating supplier contracts to implementing more efficient cleaning routes using mapping software I'd learned about, and projected potential growth scenarios. I showed him how I could increase revenue by targeting specific markets, like eco-friendly cleaning, a niche I believe was underserved. My projections were conservative, realistic, and backed by pages of data I had painstakingly gathered. But I knew the numbers alone wouldn't be enough. I needed something more, something that would convince him of my unwavering commitment. "And here is my trump card, Mr. Henderson," I stated, looking him directly in the eye. "For the first 2 years, I will not draw a salary. Every single penny of profit after expenses and paying my employees fairly, will be reinvested back into the business. I will work for free, 12, 14, even 18 hours a day if necessary, to ensure this venture succeeds. My commitment is absolute. A flicker of surprise, then something akin to respect, crossed Mr. Henderson's face. He leaned back in his chair, studying me for a long moment. It was a gamble, a monumental risk, but it was the only way. A few weeks later, the call came. The loan was approved. Mrs. Albright, relieved and touched by my dedication, offered me a generous payment plan for her existing equipment and client list. The deal was done. The first 2 years were brutal, just as I had predicted. 18-hour days were not uncommon. I was on my feet constantly, scrubbing, hauling supplies, driving between clients. My body, no longer young, ached in places I hadn't known existed. I spent nights poring over accounts, learning new software, building a professional website, and implementing online booking systems. It was a steep learning curve, filled with frustration and moments of self-doubt. There were days I would collapse into bed, utterly exhausted, questioning if I had made the right choice, if I was too old, too tired for this. But in those moments of profound exhaustion, a face would flash in my mind. Leo's. Not the accusing face from his birthday, but the bright, innocent face of my grandson, the one who used to greet me with a joyful shout, and Michael's too, before the coldness. I imagined a future where Leo might understand, where he might see what I had built, not just for myself, but as a testament to the love that had been so cruelly discarded. This wasn't just about making money. It was about proving my worth, about building a legacy that couldn't be denied, no matter what names they chose to call me. This quiet, persistent hope, combined with a fierce pride, was the fuel that kept me going, pushing me through every ache, every challenge, every late, lonely night. The foundations I laid in those grueling first 2 years, built on sheer grit and relentless effort, began to bear fruit with astonishing speed. Vance Cleaning Services, my modest venture, quickly earned a reputation for its unwavering reliability and fair pricing. In a market often plagued by inconsistent quality, our meticulous attention to detail and professional approach stood out. We started with small commercial contracts, offices and storefronts, and word of mouth spread like wildfire. Soon we were inundated with requests, expanding into larger commercial spaces and eventually a thriving residential cleaning division. I hired more staff, carefully vetting each applicant, ensuring they shared my dedication to excellence. I provided fair wages and comprehensive training, creating a loyal and motivated team. By the end of year 3, I was no longer working without a salary. I was earning a modest, yet comfortable income. The business was not just self-sustaining, it was flourishing. By year 5, I had accumulated enough capital to do something I had only ever dreamed of. I bought the building that housed our main office and storage facility. It was a tangible symbol of my journey, a solid structure built on the ashes of my heartache. From a cleaning lady struggling to make ends meet to the owner of a successful growing enterprise, the transformation was undeniable. Yet as Vance Cleaning Services continued its upward trajectory, a new hunger began to stir within me. The success, while deeply satisfying, only fueled my ambition. I looked around at the bustling city, seeing not just buildings to be cleaned, but opportunities to be seized. I started researching other service-based businesses, seeking out sectors that could complement my existing operations, creating a synergistic network of services. My analytical mind, honed by years of managing a household and then a business, saw connections where others saw separate entities. Over the next few years, I strategically acquired a small landscaping company, recognizing the natural link between property maintenance and cleaning. Then came a general maintenance and handyman service, followed by a property management firm. Each acquisition was carefully planned, meticulously researched, and integrated into the Vance umbrella. My initial $3,000 savings had multiplied into sums I had never dared to dream of. Not thousands, but hundreds of thousands, flowing into my accounts. It wasn't about extravagance for me, not truly. I moved into a nicer, more spacious home, traded my old beat-up car for something reliable and comfortable, and invested in better personal care, like regular massages for my still aching back. But the true wealth lay in the freedom and security it provided. My external transformation was profound. The weary lines around my eyes softened, replaced by a confident sparkle. My posture straightened, my steps became more purposeful. I started wearing tailored clothes that fit my new role, no longer blending into the background. But the most significant change was internal. The shy, self-effacing Eleanor, who had always put others first, who had silently absorbed blows, was gone. In her place stood a woman of steel, a businesswoman who commanded respect, not just in boardrooms, but in the way she carried herself, in the unwavering conviction of her gaze. I had built an empire, one brick at a time, and the self-respect it fostered was invaluable. Despite the triumphs, a persistent bittersweetness clung to my success. All this, all these achievements, and no family to share it with. No Michael to call with exciting news. No Leo to tell stories to. The silence stretched on, a constant reminder of what I had lost. I never reached out. Pride, yes, but also a deep-seated knowing that those who cast you aside for convenience rarely return for anything less than need. Still, I couldn't completely sever the threads. Discreetly, I kept tabs on them. Old friends, distant relatives, sometimes even news articles related to their neighborhood or Michael's company would offer snippets. I learned that Michael's career, while stable, had stagnated. He hadn't achieved the promotions or recognition he once aspired to. Vanessa, it seemed, continued her life of leisure, her days filled with social engagements and boutique shopping. And Leo was growing up. I saw glimpses of him in old social media photos from extended family members. A lanky teenager with a mop of brown hair, then a young man crossing the threshold into adulthood. Each milestone I missed, his first soccer game, his high school graduation, his first driving lesson, was a quiet ache in my heart. I knew nothing of his passions, his dreams, his struggles. He was a stranger to me, a vast, beautiful unknown. One crisp autumn afternoon, a few years into my silence, I found myself driving near their old neighborhood. I had no specific intention, just a pull towards the past. I slowed my car as I passed their house, the familiar split level with the oak tree in the front yard. The paint was peeling slightly, the garden a little less tended than it used to be. As I drove by, I caught a glimpse of Michael in the driveway, struggling with a broken lawnmower. He looked older, heavier, the youthful ambition in his eyes replaced by a weary resignation. His brow was furrowed with stress, a familiar sight to me from my own struggles, but one I had never seen on him before. I felt a pang of something akin to pity, a flicker of the old maternal instinct, but I suppressed it. I kept driving, my resolve firm. They hadn't reached out to me, and I wouldn't reach out to them. Not now. I knew with a certainty that chilled me that eventually they would come back. Not out of love, not out of regret, but because they would need something. And when that day came, I would be ready. Ready not to strike, but to show them what they had truly thrown away. I continued building, consolidating, expanding. I was preparing not for revenge, but for the next time, whatever form it might take. 6 months before that Tuesday afternoon, I had done something truly extravagant, something the old Eleanor would never have dared to dream. I bought a sprawling mansion, tucked away in a quiet, affluent neighborhood, far from the modest home Michael and I had grown up in. It boasted 5 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a gourmet kitchen, and a meticulously landscaped garden that was tended by my own landscaping division, of course. I knew intellectually that it was far more house than a 65-year-old living alone truly needed. The echoes in its grand halls sometimes felt deafening. But it wasn't just a house, it was a testament. It was a tangible, undeniable symbol of everything I had built, a monument to the resilience forged in the fires of betrayal. It was a statement, carefully crafted and patiently waited for when they finally came knocking. Many evenings I would find myself sitting alone at the expansive dining table, set with fine china and polished silverware, in a dining room larger than my old living room. The irony was rarely lost on me. I had achieved the kind of financial success I once believed was only for others, but the very family I had hoped to share it with was conspicuously absent. The silence in the mansion often felt heavier than the quiet of my previous, smaller homes. It was a poignant reminder that wealth, no matter how substantial, could not fill the emotional void left by a severed family. Yet there was also a quiet satisfaction in it, a sense of having proven my worth, not to them, but to myself. The grapevine, as it always does in small circles, eventually brought news. First, a hushed whisper from a mutual acquaintance. Michael had been laid off. Not voluntarily, not a career change, but a casualty of company downsizing. His company, once a beacon of stability, was tightening its belt, and Michael, it seemed, was deemed expendable. Then a few weeks later, a friend reported seeing Vanessa at the local discount grocery store, not her usual upscale organic market. She was meticulously counting coupons, looking visibly frazzled, her usual polished demeanor replaced by a strained weariness. It was a stark contrast to the effortless elegance she used to project. As these fragments of information trickled in, a familiar tremor began in my chest, a sensation I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't fear nor anger, but a profound sense of anticipation. It felt as though the universe was finally ready to complete the circle, to bring all the disparate threads of my life back together, for better or worse. I had spent 7 years building, preparing, fortifying my emotional and financial walls, and now the moment was approaching. I felt ready, not just to face them, but to decide, truly decide if they deserved a second chance, if there was anything left to salvage from the wreckage of our past. The decision would be mine, and mine alone. The doorbell rang at precisely 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. I remember the exact time because I had just looked at the antique clock on the mantelpiece, thinking about my next meeting. The chime was unexpectedly sharp in the quiet house. I didn't rush. I walked slowly to the security monitor by the main entrance, my heart thrumming a quick, steady rhythm against my ribs. On the screen, in grainy black and white, stood 3 figures. Michael, instantly recognizable, though his shoulders seemed more slumped, his face etched with worry lines I hadn't seen before. Beside him, Vanessa, her hair a little less perfectly styled, her expression a mix of forced composure and underlying desperation. And then Leo, my grandson. He was no longer the small boy who had called me fake grandma. He was a lanky teenager, almost a young man, standing awkwardly behind his parents, a large duffel bag slung over his shoulder, a suitcase at his feet. His expression was unreadable, a mixture of reluctance and teenage stoicism. Behind them, a second car, laden with more luggage, idled at the curb. They hadn't just come to visit, they had come to stay. 7 years. 7 years had passed since I last saw Leo, since I last truly spoke to Michael. The boy on the screen was a stranger, a ghost of the child I had loved with every fiber of my being. My heart, which had just been thrumming, now seemed to beat with a wild, almost painful urgency. I watched Michael's nervous fidgeting, Vanessa's attempts to smooth her hair and adjust her posture, a superficial veneer of normalcy, and Leo, so tall, so distant. He avoided eye contact with the camera, looking down at his feet as if embarrassed, or perhaps simply wishing he were anywhere else. Before opening the door, I took a moment to look at my own reflection in the polished surface of the monitor screen. The woman staring back was poised, elegant, her silver hair styled impeccably, her clothes expensive and well-fitting. Her eyes, though, held a depth of experience, a quiet strength that was new. She was not the same woman they had discarded, the heartbroken grandmother weeping silently in her empty home. I took a deep breath, composed my features into a neutral expression, and reached for the latch. The moment had arrived. If you've been gripped by this story so far, make sure you hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe so you don't miss the rest of what happens next. You won't believe how this unfolds. The heavy oak door swung inward, revealing me, composed and unsmiling, to the 3 figures on my doorstep. Michael, my son, was the first to speak, or rather, stumble over his words. "Mom, Eleanor, hi." His voice was hoarse, a stark contrast to the confident tone he once possessed. He gestured awkwardly at the collection of suitcases piled beside them, a silent admission of their intent. His eyes darted from my face to the spacious entryway behind me, a clear surprise registering. He hadn't expected this. Vanessa, ever the opportunist, quickly recovered her composure, her eyes scanning my expensive clothes and the gleaming marble floor. Her designer purse, once a statement of luxury, now looked a little worn, and I noted the faint stain on the knee of her otherwise stylish jeans. "Eleanor, oh my goodness, you look absolutely radiant," she gushed, her voice overly bright, a desperate attempt to bridge the 7-year chasm with flattery. "And your house, it's simply stunning. I mean, wow." Her compliments felt hollow, saccharine, designed to disarm. My gaze, however, was discerning. I saw past the forced smiles and the superficial praise, noting the subtle signs of their financial distress etched on their faces and in their wary posture. The carefully constructed facade was crumbling. Then my eyes settled on Leo. He was so tall now, nearly eye level with me, his features still retaining a hint of the boy I remembered, but overlaid with a new, almost hardened edge. "Hello, Leo," I said softly, my voice betraying none of the turmoil in my heart. He barely met my gaze, a flicker of something unreadable, perhaps embarrassment, perhaps indifference in his eyes. He mumbled a quick, almost inaudible "hi," then looked down at his feet, clearly uncomfortable. The chasm of silence stretched between us, thick and heavy, a testament to the years of estrangement. It was Michael who finally broke the tense quiet. He cleared his throat, shuffling his feet. "Mom, we have a bit of a situation. We were wondering if we could possibly stay with you for a while." The question hung in the air, audacious in its casualness, yet laced with an undeniable desperation. I simply nodded, stepping aside to allow them entry. "Come in," I said, my voice even, giving nothing away. They entered cautiously, their eyes wide with unconcealed awe as they took in the grand foyer, the sweeping staircase, the tasteful artwork adorning the walls. The sheer opulence of the mansion was clearly a shock. Vanessa gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Michael merely shook his head in disbelief, his gaze sweeping from the high ceilings to the intricate crown molding. "Mom, I had no idea," Michael finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "The cleaning business must have really taken off." There was a mixture of surprise and perhaps even a hint of envy in his tone. I met his gaze, my expression unyielding. "I don't own a cleaning business anymore, Michael," I corrected him calmly. "I own several businesses, a cleaning service, a landscaping company, a maintenance and repair firm, and a property management company. They all operate under the Vance Holdings umbrella." My words hung in the air, a quiet assertion of my formidable transformation. His eyes widened further, a silent acknowledgement of the vast chasm between his perception and my reality. I led them into the expansive living room, furnished with elegant, minimalist Italian leather sofas and chairs. I gestured for them to sit, taking a seat opposite them, carefully maintaining my neutral demeanor. Michael and Vanessa sat stiffly, visibly uncomfortable on the sleek, luxurious furniture, their worn suitcases still by the door. Leo, meanwhile, had slumped onto a sofa, immediately pulling out his phone and burying his face in its glowing screen, trying to escape the awkwardness of the situation. I watched him for a moment, then extended my hand. "Leo, put the phone away," I instructed, my voice firm but not harsh. "When adults are having a conversation, it's respectful to participate, or at least to listen without distraction." He looked up, startled, his eyes still clouded with that same indifference. But he hesitated, then slowly, reluctantly, handed me his phone. I placed it on the coffee table, out of reach. The power dynamic, subtly, had shifted. The air was thick with unspoken questions, with the weight of 7 years of silence. I decided to cut to the chase. "So," I began, my voice clear and direct, "after 7 years of no calls, no cards, no contact whatsoever, why are you here now?" Vanessa predictably was the first to offer an explanation, a flimsy veil over the stark truth. "Oh, Eleanor, you know how life gets. So busy. But family is forever, isn't it? And we always knew we could count on you." Her words rang hollow, dripping with a false sentimentality that made my stomach churn. Michael, however, seemed to find a shred of honesty. He squirmed uncomfortably, then finally admitted, his voice barely audible, "Mom, I lost my job. The company downsized. We're really behind on the mortgage. The bank started foreclosure proceedings last week." We literally have nowhere else to go. The confession hung heavy in the air, a stark, painful admission of defeat. Before he could finish, Vanessa eagerly interjected, her eyes alight with a renewed, desperate hope. So we thought, since you have all this space, we could just stay with you temporarily until we get back on our feet. Just for a little while. She smiled, a brittle, hopeful smile, as if her suggestion was the most natural thing in the world. I looked at each of them in turn. Michael, slumped and defeated, consumed by need. Vanessa, still clinging to her pretense, her eyes calculating the benefits. And Leo, so young, so aloof, his expression betraying nothing but a desire to be elsewhere. 7 years of carefully constructed walls, and now they stood before me, expecting me to open my doors as if nothing had ever happened. The decision now rested squarely on my shoulders. I looked at Leo, then back at Michael and Vanessa, who sat expectantly, hope and desperation warring in their expressions. My gaze returned to Leo, studying his face. Leo, I began, my voice clear and steady. Do you remember me? He hesitated, shifting in his seat, his eyes still avoiding mine. And do you remember what role I played in your life, what I was to you? He mumbled, almost inaudibly. Your dad's mom. He paused, then added, echoing the words that had torn my world apart 7 years ago. That's different. The familiar sting, though dulled by time and resolve, still pricked at my heart. No, Leo, I stated firmly, my voice leaving no room for argument. I am your grandmother, your real grandmother, your only grandmother on your father's side and one who loved you completely, despite what you were told when you were 8 years old. My words, sharp and direct, pierced the fragile veneer of polite conversation. Vanessa visibly blanched, her carefully constructed composure faltering. Michael, sensing the turn in the conversation, tried to interject, his voice laced with an attempt at conciliation. Mom, please, let's not bring up old wounds now. We're here because we need help. I held up a hand, silencing him. Old wounds, Michael, bleed for a very long time if they're never properly tended to. And some wounds are inflicted with calculated malice, not by accident. My eyes, cold and unwavering, fixed on Vanessa. Do you remember Vanessa telling my grandson that I wasn't his real grandmother? Do you remember deliberately creating doubt and confusion in an 8-year-old boy's mind so he would reject the woman who loved him unconditionally and raised his father alone? Vanessa looked like a deer caught in headlights, her face a mask of shock and a fleeting trace of guilt. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Michael, however, finally found his voice, a pleading note in it. Mom, you're exaggerating. It was a misunderstanding. She didn't mean it that way. Oh, I assure you, Michael, she meant it precisely that way, I countered, my voice low and dangerous. And you, Michael, you stood by and watched as your son, my grandson, rejected me. You, the boy I sacrificed everything for, told me to leave, to give you space to handle it. You chose her narrative over my heartbreak. For 7 years, you both chose silence, blocked calls, returned cards. Do you honestly believe those wounds are old enough to be forgotten simply because you now require something from me? Leo, who had been listening intently, his face a mixture of confusion and dawning horror, finally spoke up, his voice cracking slightly. Mom, what is she talking about? What did you tell me? I shifted my gaze back to him, softening it slightly but maintaining the gravity of the moment. Your mother, I explained directly to Leo, cutting through any potential denial, told you I wasn't your real grandmother. She did this to diminish my role in your life, to push me away, and to make her own mother seem more important to you. She convinced you to reject me, your father's mother, the woman who loved you from the moment you were born. Leo's face crumpled. I was just a kid, he stammered, shame washing over his features. I didn't understand. And you are not to blame for that, Leo, I said, my voice gentle now. Children believe what their parents tell them. You were manipulated. The blame for that lies squarely with the adults who chose to deceive you. My eyes flickered to Michael and Vanessa, whose faces were now a study in discomfort and regret. Michael, seizing the opportunity, rushed to fill the silence. Mom, please. We know we messed up. We made mistakes, but we're family. Please forgive us. We just need a place to stay." His tone was desperate, pleading. I turned away from them, walking to the large window overlooking the expansive garden, my back to them. I gazed out at the perfectly manicured lawn, the vibrant flowers, the distant trees. Family. The word, once so sacred, now felt tainted. They hadn't wanted family when I had everything to give. They only remembered it when they had nothing left. I thought of the lonely dinners, the quiet victories, the years of building this empire out of sheer, stubborn will. After a long moment, I turned back, facing them fully. I met their gazes one by one. Michael's pleading eyes, Vanessa's carefully schooled regret, and Leo's newfound shame. I saw them not as the figures who had wounded me, but as people standing on the precipice, utterly reliant on my mercy. And I saw myself too. Not the broken woman they had abandoned, but the one who had risen from the ashes, stronger, wiser, and in control. "You can stay," I said, my voice firm, allowing no trace of emotion to color my tone. A collective sigh of relief escaped them. Vanessa's shoulders slumped, her tension easing visibly. "But there will be conditions. My house, my rules. Everyone contributes. There are no free rides here. And most importantly," I paused, letting my words sink in, "the past issues, the ones we just discussed, must be addressed. Not glossed over, not hidden, but genuinely addressed. Understood?" Michael and Vanessa nodded vigorously, a desperate eagerness replacing their previous discomfort. "Yes, Mom, absolutely. Anything you want," Michael assured me. "We understand," Vanessa echoed, though her eyes still held a hint of resentment. I gave a curt nod. "Good. We will discuss the details of your contributions and how we will begin to address these old wounds over dinner this evening. For now, you must be tired." "Elena," I called, and my housekeeper, a kind, efficient woman who had been with me for years, emerged from the hallway. "Please show Michael, Vanessa, and Leo to their rooms. They are in the West Wing, and please tell them to dress for dinner. We eat promptly at 7. I watched as Elena, with a polite but knowing smile, led them away, their suitcases clattering softly behind them. They glanced back at me, a mixture of relief, apprehension, and a lingering sense of bewilderment. They were in my world now, and they would play by my rules. The next morning I rose with the sun, as I always did. My early routine of meditation, a light breakfast, and reviewing initial reports from my various businesses was a sacred ritual. As I sipped my tea in the sun-drenched breakfast nook, I could hear the faint sounds of movement upstairs, muffled voices, creaking floorboards, indicating my unexpected guests were stirring. It had been 7 years since my house had held such sounds, and the unfamiliarity was jarring. Soon after Elena, my meticulous housekeeper and longtime assistant, arrived. She moved through the house with an elegant efficiency that spoke of years of experience. As she began setting the table for breakfast, I gave her new instructions. "Elena, they will be staying for an extended period. Please prepare the guest rooms accordingly. And Vanessa will be assisting you with household duties, starting today." Elena, usually unflappable, paused for a fraction of a second, her gaze meeting mine. My household was run like a precision instrument, every task already assigned and executed flawlessly. The implication of Vanessa's assistance in such an organized system was clear. Elena simply offered a discreet, knowing nod, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. She understood. A few minutes later, Michael appeared in the dining room doorway, looking rumpled and sleepless, clearly not having slept well on the luxurious guest bed. He attempted a smile, a flicker of gratitude in his tired eyes. "Morning, Mom. Thank you again for letting us stay. It means a lot." I met his gaze, my expression neutral. "You're welcome, Michael. But as I said yesterday, everyone contributes here. My groundskeeper, Ricardo, handles all the yard work and exterior maintenance. You'll be assisting him after breakfast. He's expecting you." Michael's eyes widened, a flicker of surprise, perhaps even dismay, crossing his face. Manual labor was hardly something he was accustomed to. He had always been the clean-collared executive. "Yard work? Mom, He trailed off, then seemed to remember his precarious position. "Yes, Mom, of course, whatever you need." Just then Vanessa made her grand entrance. She descended the staircase, not exactly floating, but certainly making an effort. She was dressed in a shimmering silk robe, her hair carefully arranged, and a light application of makeup already applied. She moved directly into the gourmet kitchen, her eyes scanning the gleaming surfaces. "Eleanor, darling, this kitchen is simply divine. So spacious, so modern. Do you spend a lot of time cooking here?" She gushed, her voice still overly bright, trying to project an air of effortless sophistication she clearly no longer possessed. "No, Vanessa, I don't cook," I stated flatly, cutting through her theatrical display. "Elena manages the kitchen, and my personal chef prepares all our meals. But since you'll be assisting with household duties, your focus will be on learning the kitchen operations and general housekeeping. Elena will show you the ropes after breakfast." Vanessa's smile faltered, her perfectly painted lips thinning slightly. "Kitchen duties? And housekeeping? Eleanor, I've never really done those sorts of things. I've always had help." The subtle disdain in her tone was not lost on me. "Then it's high time you learned, wouldn't you say?" I challenged, my voice calm but with an underlying edge. "How exactly did you manage to run your own household, Vanessa, if you never really did anything? Was Michael solely responsible for everything?" I let the question hang in the air, a pointed reminder of her past complacency. "Regardless, Elena is an excellent teacher. She will train you thoroughly. You'll be an expert in no time." Before Vanessa could formulate another protest, Leo shuffled in, looking even more disheveled than his father. His hair was tousled, his eyes still heavy with sleep, and he was wearing a faded t-shirt and sweatpants. He slumped into the seat Michael had indicated, then looked down at the array of silverware laid out before him with a bewildered expression. "Why are there so many forks?" he mumbled, pushing a stray strand of hair from his eyes. I took a slow sip of my tea, observing his confusion. "Leo, this is a formal place setting. Each fork has a specific purpose depending on the course. In this house, we maintain certain standards. We dress appropriately for meals, no matter the time of day, and we learn proper table etiquette. You'll also be helping your father with the outdoor chores after breakfast. You're strong, you can carry your weight." The breakfast that followed was a stilted affair, punctuated by the clinking of cutlery and the occasional forced pleasantry from Michael and Vanessa. I, however, used the opportunity to continue laying down the law, specifically addressing Michael. "Michael," I began, my voice clear across the table, "I've often wondered why, despite your early promise, your career never truly took off. It seems to me, looking back, that you always gravitated towards the path of least resistance. You never had to struggle, not truly. I made sure of that, didn't I?" I paused, letting the implications sink in. "Perhaps that's why you found it so easy to dismiss me, to let your wife dictate our relationship. You lack the grit, the backbone, the character building that comes from overcoming adversity." Michael stared at his plate, unable to meet my gaze. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably, clearly hating the spotlight. "So," I concluded, looking from Michael to Vanessa, "this is not a vacation. This is an opportunity for all of you to learn, to contribute, and perhaps to finally understand the value of hard work and respect. You have a clear choice: accept these conditions and abide by them without complaint, or find somewhere else to go. Do we understand each other?" Their silence was more eloquent than any words. After a moment, Michael swallowed hard. "Yes, Mom, we understand." Vanessa nodded stiffly, her face pale. Leo, though quiet, watched me with a newfound intensity, a flicker of something in his eyes that looked suspiciously like curiosity, perhaps even a nascent respect. The battle had begun. The days that followed were a fascinating study in character. From the quiet sanctuary of my office, a space I had built for focused work, I observed the new dynamics of my household. Through the large window overlooking the expansive backyard, I could see Michael struggling with the pool cleaning. He looked utterly out of his element, the sophisticated executive now clumsily wrestling with a long-handled brush, splashing water onto his already damp clothes. Ricardo, my seasoned groundskeeper, watched him with a mixture of patience and quiet amusement, occasionally offering a gentle instruction. Michael's movements were stiff, his brow furrowed with a frustration born of unfamiliarity. Later that afternoon, a flurry of raised voices emanated from the laundry room, followed by a choked I walked down the hall to investigate. I found Vanessa standing amidst a pile of ruined, expensive white linen towels, now streaked with an alarming shade of blue and pink. Her face was flushed, tear tracks marring her carefully applied makeup. "I don't understand," she wailed, gesturing wildly at the damaged fabric. "I just put everything in together. Why is it all ruined?" I calmly picked up a stained towel, examining the delicate weave now irreversibly discolored. "You put colors and whites together, Vanessa," I stated, my voice devoid of judgment, simply stating a fact. "These were fine Egyptian cotton, quite expensive. But don't worry, the cost of replacing them will be worked off through additional household duties. Elena will show you how to properly sort and wash laundry, piece by piece, until you've mastered it." Vanessa's shoulders slumped further, another lesson learned the hard way. I left her to Elena's patient instruction and continued my rounds. I found Leo sitting by the edge of the sparkling pool, his legs dangling in the cool water, a sullen expression on his face. He was staring into the depths, kicking his feet idly. I sat down beside him on the warm stone, careful not to disturb his quiet contemplation. "Leo," I began gently, "do you remember your 8th birthday party?" He nodded slowly, still not meeting my gaze. "A little," he mumbled. "It was confusing." "Confusing how?" I prompted, my voice soft, inviting him to open up. "Mom said you were busy," he confessed, his voice barely a whisper. "She said you didn't want to see us anymore, that you'd moved on." He finally looked at me, his eyes full of a pain that surprised me. "And then Dad told you to leave." My heart ached, a sharp, familiar pang. "Leo, I never stopped wanting to see you," I said, reaching out to gently touch his arm. He didn't pull away. "What, for a single day? Your parents prevented me from seeing you. They blocked my calls, returned my cards, and kept me from you. Every holiday, every birthday, every milestone, I thought of you, and my heart broke a little more." I paused, letting the truth sink in. "I was there the day you were born. I was there for your first steps, your first words, your first scraped knee. I loved you, Leo, with all my heart, and that love never faded no matter what they told you." I watched as his eyes welled up, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. "Why would Mom do that?" he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Your mother, I believe, was insecure," I explained, choosing my words carefully. "She was afraid that my bond with you, as your father's mother, would somehow diminish her own role, or her mother's. Fear and insecurity can make people do cruel things, Leo. They can twist the truth and cause great pain." Leo wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, a raw vulnerability in his expression. Did you really love my dad that much?" he asked, a sudden shift in his curiosity. "Tell me more about him. What was he like when he was little?" The question was a lifeline, a desperate plea for connection, for a past that had been stolen from him. A small smile touched my lips. "Oh, your father," I began, launching into stories I hadn't told in years. "He was terrible at baseball, despite trying his hardest every season. Always struck out." Leo actually chuckled. "But he made the most amazing pancakes, and he loved dinosaurs, absolutely obsessed. He wanted to be a paleontologist when he grew up, not a businessman." I shared tales of his childhood quirks, his small triumphs, his innocent failures, painting a picture of a human being, not just the distant, stressed father Leo knew. As I spoke, Leo listened with an intensity that warmed my heart. He absorbed every word, every detail. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, then said thoughtfully, "Dad always seems worried, like he's always afraid of something." His perception was surprisingly acute. "Yes," I agreed. "Your father has always been easily swayed by fear and the opinions of others. That's why he let your mother keep us apart, even though he knew it was wrong." Leo looked at me, his eyes brimming with tears again. "I'm so sorry, Grandma," he whispered, "for what I said, for pushing away your gift." The sincerity in his voice was undeniable. Do you hate us?" I reached out and pulled him into a gentle hug. He stiffened for a moment, then slowly, tentatively, leaned into my embrace. I was very angry, Leo, I admitted, my voice muffled against his hair. And I was heartbroken. But I never hated you, and I never stopped loving you, not for a moment. He pulled back, his eyes searching mine. Can, can we be a family again, Grandma? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. For real this time? Oh. I looked at my grandson, a young man who had finally seen the truth, and a fierce hope bloomed in my chest. Yes, Leo, I said, my voice firm with renewed purpose. We can, but it has to be on terms of truth. No more manipulation. And we all have to learn to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. He nodded, tears still streaming down his face, but a fragile smile beginning to form. This was the first step, a real step towards healing. The conversation with Leo by the pool, raw and honest, had been a turning point, not just for him, but for me. However, it seemed Michael and Vanessa were not quite ready for such profound truths. A few days later, while I was reviewing contracts in my office, I heard a rising crescendo of voices from the kitchen. Michael and Vanessa, both visibly angry and exhausted from their assigned chores, stormed into my office. Michael's hands were rough and red from pruning, Vanessa's usually pristine nails were chipped, and her silk robe was now replaced by practical, albeit ill-fitting, work clothes. Mom, this has to stop, Michael blurted out, his voice laced with indignation. This servant work, it's humiliating. We're your family, not your staff. And what about boundaries, Eleanor? Vanessa chimed in, her voice shrill. You can't just expect us to jump to your every command after all these years. We need to discuss things. I calmly closed my laptop, placing my hands flat on the desk. Sit down, I instructed, my voice unwavering, pointing to the two chairs opposite my desk. As they reluctantly took their seats, I looked past them to the doorway where Leo stood, drawn by the commotion. Leo, come in. You need to hear this too. He hesitated, then entered, his gaze fixed on me. Michael, I began, my voice steady. For 7 years, you chose zero contact with me. Zero. You were complicit in my complete isolation from my grandson and from your life. You chose to abandon me. My eyes moved to Vanessa. And you, Vanessa, systematically poisoned my relationship with Leo, twisting his perception of me, and you successfully turned my son against his own mother. You, a woman who had never known hardship, took away the one true joy I had in my later years. Michael opened his mouth to protest, but I cut him off. Don't pretend you don't remember, Michael. I was standing right there, heartbroken and humiliated, and you told me to leave. You chose your wife's cruel words over your mother's pain. That wasn't just a mistake, Michael. That was a profound betrayal. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. Your entire life, you've chosen the easy way out. You've lacked the courage to stand up for what's right, to take personal responsibility for your choices. And now you're experiencing the consequences of those choices. Vanessa, always quick to strategize, tried a different tactic. Eleanor, we admit we made mistakes. We were wrong. We're sorry. What do you want from us? You want us to grovel? The apology felt forced, a means to an end. I looked at her, my expression firm. No, Vanessa, I'm not happy, and I don't want you to grovel, but I am done being taken for granted, and I am done accepting insincere apologies. I want genuine effort, genuine change. I leaned forward, my tone dropping to a quiet intensity. Here's my proposition. I turned to Michael first. Michael, I am offering you a job at Advanced Services, starting at $60,000 a year. It will be an entry-level position, far below what you're used to, but it will be stable. You'll start from the bottom, learn the business, and earn your way up. It also comes with a mandatory condition. You will attend weekly counseling sessions, paid for by Advanced Services, to address your issues with courage, responsibility, and communication. This is not negotiable. Then I turned to Vanessa. Vanessa, you have two choices. You can also accept an entry-level position at Advanced Services with the same starting salary and the same mandatory counseling requirement. Or, I paused, picking up a document from my desk, you can sign this non-disclosure agreement. It comes with a one-time payment of $50,000. In exchange, you agree to never interfere with Leo's relationship with me, Never speak negatively about me or my family, and never publicly acknowledge or discuss the lies you told about me in the past. Breach of this agreement will result in legal action and forfeiture of the payment. I laid the document on the desk between us. Vanessa gasped, her eyes wide with shock and humiliation. The terms were harsh, designed to ensure her silence and prevent any future manipulation. You, you want to buy my silence? She stammered, aghast. I want to protect Leo and my peace of mind from any further manipulation. I corrected her calmly. This is not about retribution. This is an opportunity for all of us to rebuild on foundations of honesty and mutual respect. If you don't accept these terms, either Michael's job in counseling or your job in counseling or the NDA, then you have 2 weeks to find somewhere else to go. The choice is yours. Leo, who had been listening intently, finally spoke up, his voice still a little shaky. Grandma, he asked, what about my choice? I turned to him, my gaze soft. Leo, you always have a choice about your life. Who you want to be and who you want to have in it. Your choices are yours alone to make. Michael, broken, looked at me, his shoulders slumped. Mom, he admitted, his voice raw, I don't know if I'm strong enough. I don't know if I can do it. Then something shifted in his eyes, a glimmer of the boy I remembered, of genuine remorse. He took a deep breath. But I want to try to be back. I want to be the son you deserve to have. A wave of emotion washed over me, a feeling I hadn't felt in years, hope. I turned to Leo. And Leo, I said, I want to be your real grandmother again, for real this time. He didn't hesitate. He rushed to me, throwing his arms around me in a tight embrace, the first hug in 7 long, silent years. Vanessa, after a long, agonizing internal struggle, picked up the pen and with a trembling hand, signed the NDA. I was so insecure, Eleanor, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. And selfish, I'm sorry. The words finally felt genuine, tinged with genuine shame. 3 months later, my house smelled like vanilla and brown sugar. I was in the kitchen, baking Michael's favorite chocolate chip cookies, a recipe I hadn't made in years. The house felt full, not just with people, but with warmth. Michael was thriving at advanced services, diligently learning the ropes, proving himself dependable and hardworking. His counseling sessions were, according to him, brutal but necessary. He was slowly rebuilding his confidence and, more importantly, his character. Vanessa had kept her word, finding an unexpected freedom and accountability. She was learning to manage her own life, slowly but surely, and her marriage to Michael was beginning to rebuild, not on pretense, but on honesty. And Leo. Leo had moved into the guest house next door, eager for his own space but closer to me. His grades had improved, he joined the debate team, and he spent many evenings in my living room, curled up on the Italian leather sofa, listening to me tell stories of his father's childhood, a past he was finally reclaiming. Elena, ever observant, remarked one morning, "The house feels full, Eleanor, like it's meant to be." I looked at her, then out at my vibrant home, a sanctuary built from pain, but now filled with a different kind of strength. I had found my real family, not one inherited by blood or dictated by societal expectations, but one built on choice, on forgiveness, and on the hard-won foundation of truth. I was no longer alone.